Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Baron Podcast Ep.8. Now, some crazy matches went on, specifically in the Premier League, with the Bundesliga season officially being over. As well, we have some transfer news regarding the Bundesliga. But most importantly, some crucial games for certain teams. West Ham winning against Chelsea and Sheffield United in a surprise win, despite their recent poor form, winning against Tottenham 3-1, as well as Liverpool getting thrashed by Manchester City after being crowned Premier League champions just a week ago. So let's start with some of the recent old games that occurred. Aston Villa versus Wolves at the start of the match day. And Aston Villa were expected to put in a strong performance, which they did to a degree, but still, Wolves continuing to push for the Champions League games and Champions League qualification, and they managed to get a 1-0 win against Aston Villa, with Aston Villa not clinching any points. Now, Aston Villa has been afforded so many chances to get those points to get out of the relegation zone, but unfortunately they haven't taken it. And with Liverpool as their next target, next game, I doubt them to secure points after, of course, Liverpool today was thrashed by Manchester City. So they will be looking to get some revenge or trying to win back what they lost, some respect as Premier League champions, because that was a very poor performance, but then again expected. But still, Aston Villa will definitely need to find those 3 points, or a point even, to get into the Premier League and stay into the Premier League and get out of that relegation zone that has been plaguing them for a long time now in this season. Another important game that went on was Manchester United versus Brighton. Brighton in some amazing put in some amazing performances overall this since the restart of the season after the coronavirus closing down the league. And when they returned, like many of the Premier League clubs, many Premier League clubs were looking shaky, but they were putting in some strong performances, drawing Leicester City as well as defeating Arsenal. And they were putting in a solid performance. In Manchester United, there was some fear amongst Manchester United supporters facing Brighton, who were looking very strong. But then again, with Pogba and Fernandes in the midfield, they looked very, very, very good, with their influence across the pitch being very strong, and securing a solid 3-0 win against Brighton. Now, Fernandes scored 2 goals for Manchester United, with Mason Greenwood, a top prospect, scoring another goal for Manchester United. I think Greenwood is a potential great future ahead of him, but I still think it might be a little bit too early to rely on him much. I think they should still start him, but they do need stronger players. Now, Manchester United needs new signings. They need to invest in the summer market. There are already clubs like Liverpool who aren't looking to potentially invest because they don't have millions because of the coronavirus and its effect on income streams. But Manchester United, they should invest, because if you saw the game against Manchester United versus Brighton, you can, as well as if you didn't see it and you just saw on paper what happened, you can see that Bruno Fernandes and Pogba were putting in some pretty solid performances. Pogba getting an assist and Bruno Fernandes scoring 2 goals. Now, their influence on the pitch was clear to see, but when they were subbed off the game, you could just see their dip in performances. Specifically, Bruno Fernandes leaving the pitch or being subbed off because he was playing a lot of minutes for Manchester United that week. I think you can't rely too much on Bruno Fernandes. You should praise Bruno Fernandes for making Manchester United look like such a strong team with him on the field. But when he's off the field and not really pushing his team, they declined in performances. You could see Brighton having more chances than they should have, with Manchester United not having that complete dominance as they did in the first half and the start of the second half when they had Fernandes on the field as well as Pogba. But when he's off the field, you don't see that same touch, that same perseverance, or commitment to win the game and push themselves to score more goals. And they need more investment in more top class players who can push the team further and give that commitment. Specifically, I would say in the back four, they need more defenders. I think that Lindelof, he's an okay defender, but they need to find a potential upgrade maybe. With Harry Maguire, I think that would be incredible. And maybe potential front three, and of course in the midfield, just one player in the midfield. And just that investment needs to be put in place if they want to look to have a strong season next season under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Arsenal themselves were putting in a strong performance in the win against Norwich, with securing a 4-0 win against Norwich, with Norwich, of course, trying to get those 3 points or even a point from the game to look to get out of the relegation zone. But with that loss, it's just looking more and more unlikely of them staying in the Premier League next season. However, I think one thing to highlight from that Arsenal versus Norwich game is that I still don't think that Arsenal is truly changing still at this current moment. Of course, they signed a new deal with Saka, and Aubameyang was pleased to hear that, so that could lead to his decision in potentially re-signing with Arsenal. But then again, Arsenal still is not changing very well at all. You still see some of those underlying problems, and I think Arsenal, just off that one win, does not mean that they're changing, really. I think that it's a step, but still, I don't believe that Arsenal will be immediately changing from that, or that they're going to have a huge, important a future with that win in helping boost morale or confidence, or potentially leading to a stronger system. And they need to have Champions League football with some of their wage bills being so high on some of their players. And if they're only getting Europa League or even nothing, no qualification in any of those, then it's looking very, very, very poor. And Arsenal, I'm afraid, is going to look very, very weak unless they get investment from their owners, which then again I don't see happening either. And they could potentially lose some key players, such as Aubameyang, who could resign, and Lacazette and Guendouzi, who are potentially leaving as well. That does not look good. It really does not look good for Arsenal, and it does mean that the club could potentially become desperate to unload those players because, of course, they have a huge wage bill, and if they can't secure Champions League football or Europa League football, which they most certainly will not this season, then they can't keep be willing to, or keep being able and stable enough to keep affording such a high wage bill for their players. Another important game was, of course, Everton versus Leicester, with Leicester potentially trying to maybe hold on to the Champions League. They've been trying to stay in a solid state of form, which they haven't ever since the restart, and prior to the restart. They were putting in some poor performances and just were in a seriously bad form. Now Everton bouncing back, of course, under Carlo Ancelotti, whose influence is very clear to see. And in the win for Everton, 2-1 win, you could see that, with Everton being on the front foot for majority of the game, and Brendan Rodgers really had to spur his team on to get back in there. And of course, Jamie Vardy, who really is not in form at all, and not really in that form, in that pure blazing hot form he was earlier this season. And you can really see Leicester suffering without Vardy being in top stellar form. Now, the only reason Leicester even got a goal was, of course, James Maddison, who had a hip injury, but was brought on later in the game. And his influence was clear to see, of course, with him getting subbed in, and he's already putting in some key passes, and he got an assist with Iheanacho for Leicester City, scoring a goal and bringing it to 2-1. But then again, still, Ancelotti, solid tactics. Now, speaking about Carlo Ancelotti and Everton look, of course, stronger with Ancelotti, as I said previously. But what you're seeing is that this could be a Everton side that get top four. And I can definitely see that with Carlo Ancelotti. He is very, very strong. Very, very strong in terms of his management of the team as a whole ever since he's taken control of it. And Everton were in very, very a poor condition when he took control of them, you can see that influence, and you can see that many of the players are looking more bright and sharp, with Richarlison and Dominic Calvert-Lewin and other key Everton players. You can see that influence being transferred, and them in their performances specifically. Now, if he gets investment in this transfer window, and hopefully if he's staying here for the long term in the next transfer window after that, and he gets he gets money to invest in new players, then I can definitely see them getting at least or at most top four with Everton, because I think that with his tactical prowess and his management prowess, I think it's possible for Everton to put in some strong performances, because they have some pretty good players already in the team, and they have new and upcoming players such as Benjamin Gordon, who looked very, very good in the Leicester City game. It could be a very strong side. It could be a very, very strong side in next season, and if they have the money to invest in the transfer window, then they can definitely, most certainly, push for top four. West Ham putting in a very, very, very good performance against Chelsea, in an upset win against Chelsea, their rivals, 3-2, and and that's incredible. Of course, for West Ham fans, that's amazing. Not only do they win against their rivals Chelsea, they get those 3 points, and now they're out of the relegation zone currently. And I think that's a great platform for West Ham to build off of, because if they have such a massive stadium and they have a lot of players who are on some very strong, very, very big wage bills right now, and if they don't stay in the Premier League, they are going to be in very, very, very poor shape. Now, with that win against Chelsea, they are out of the relegation zone, and Chelsea, of course, will be disappointed, but because they could potentially lose the top four, but I still think that they will stay in the top four. But still, West Ham, way more important win for them, and the influence from that win should hopefully spur them to keep pushing themselves and get out and continue to stay out of that relegation zone, which they were prior to the game. And it's important. It's very important that they got those 3 points, and definitely a positive performance from them, which they could potentially capitalize and continue to stay in the Premier League. Tottenham Hotspurs in a disappointing performance against Sheffield United, and Sheffield, who were in poor form and looked as if they lost that momentum and that heat that they were having for much of the season. And they showed it again, and they won 3-1 against Tottenham. Harry Kane scored a goal, but he had another goal prior to that disallowed, and of course Mourinho and Tottenham were furious at the goal being disallowed by VAR. Now, overall, Tottenham, they put in a win, and they look like they're going to bounce from that. They're going to put in some strong performances later, and they can build off of that. But then they disappointedly collapse into another defeat against a side that was looking very poor in form, and them looking in positively with that win against West Ham. They didn't translate, and of course they lost 3-1, and Sheffield United will of course be happy with that win. Now, the main match that occurred was, of course, Liverpool versus Manchester City. My goodness, was that a poor performance from Liverpool. Now, it's kind of expected. Multiple title-winning sides, after they've won the title, they have a very strong dip or a moderate dip in performance. Now, Liverpool did not look like themselves at all. Some of their important players is not looking very bright and sharp. Sadio Mane missing some strong chances that he received. And, of course, the front three not looking that coherent. And the back four even looking way worse than the front three. Of course, it's expected to a degree that performance after winning the title. That they don't really have a game. There's no really point in what are you winning for? You've already won the title. There's not much else to play for. But, of course, they won the title, and that shouldn't take away from the fact that they won the title. But still, a poor performance with Manchester City winning 4-0. Could have been 5-0, but Riyad Mahrez's goal was ruled out because of a handball. But still, you should expect more. Now, some of those players, specifically, I really like Andrew Robertson, but he did not look sharp at all. His usual work ethic on the pitch when it comes to running and long distance, just sprinting up and down the field, you didn't really see that. And him marking Phil Foden was very, very, very poor. Phil Foden scored a goal primarily as well as due to his own skill between Bruyne. He passed to De Bruyne, and he went past Andrew Robertson, and De Bruyne passed him the ball, and Phil Foden slotted it in. But Andrew Robertson, poor marking. But focusing on Phil Foden specifically on that game, he wasn't the man of the match. Kevin De Bruyne was, but still, he looks very, very, very strong. He should be on the main 11. I really do think so, and I think that the reason why Pep Guardiola doesn't put him in as much, I don't really understand. I think he's a very top talent, and he's looking very, very strong. Just for his age, I think he's putting in some top performances, and he should be starting way more next season, because if he doesn't start way more next season than he did this season, then he definitely should look to move, because Phil Foden, he has a lot of potential, and the more starts, so when he doesn't get in starts when I feel that he should, then it's just going to be stalling his development. And when his development is stalled out even more, then it's a huge waste of potential. And Manchester City need to give Phil Foden, especially a local lad, something that your club can focus on. Because, of course, Manchester City gets that reputation of, and to a degree rightfully so, if I'm going to be honest, about big money, and that's pretty much it. But they need to show the club's tradition, and I think that it would be a good way if they had Phil Foden be a key player of that team and regularly playing, and it could be an icon for many Manchester City fans because they have a local lad playing, and I think that could be a great outcome. All right, we have some transfer news that's going to be happening, specifically surrounding the Bundesliga. Hertha Berlin, they received a lot of investment during Jurgen Klinsmann, who was the manager, but then he resigned, and of course they brought in a lot of signings. But those signings didn't really pay off, with them performing moderately and subpar to what they expected with such investment. But the investor is going to be investing another 150 million euros, which should go into the market. Now, if Hertha Berlin is smarter about this, now I'm going to be more wary when it comes to Hertha Berlin and what they can do with the investment, because it hasn't really paid off this season. But then again, of course, Jurgen Klinsmann resigning and really just putting the team off balance. But again, Hertha Berlin, if they can spend the 150 million euros that their investor has invested into the team wisely and bring in some players. Now, there are reports that they're thinking of bringing in Weston Mckennie. Schalke overall aren't looking that strong economically, with the coronavirus hampering their income and just putting more financial strain on the club. But if they bring in players like Weston Mckennie, I think could be a great addition, because Weston Mckennie in the midfield is very, very hardworking and is a strong player to have in your midfield. And I do think he would be a good signing, and I think it would be good for his development as well. Because if Hertha Berlin, again, as I said earlier, are smart about their investment of the money that they are receiving from their investor, if they bring in players like Weston Mckennie and bring other top-class players, then that helps Weston Mckennie in his development too. He's only 21, and I just still think that he has a lot of room to grow, and it could be a positive factor or positive experience for Weston Mckennie in his development. Another player specifically for SC Freiburg who has attracted interest from multiple clubs is Alexander Schwolo. Teams such as Ajax, as well as Schalke specifically. Schalke looking to replace Alexander Nubel, who is moving to Bayern at the end of the season, and will be potentially a number one goalkeeper for Bayern, but it doesn't look likely with his performances. But specifically, they're looking for a replacement, and that is Alexander Schwolo. Now, Alexander Schwolo, as a Freiburg fan, my goodness, has he been incredible for SC Freiburg. He has saved so many goals and potential goals from the opposition team, and you can see his influence on the pitch in terms of really keeping SC Freiburg looking all right as in defensively okay, because at times we've been penetrated in the defense, but with his influence and his potential to block so many goals, it really is an incredible performance on his part. Now, looking at Schwallow and overall compared to other goalkeepers in the Bundesliga, you can see his influence. I believe he's number 2 or number 3 when it comes to shots saved percentage-wise. Now, he is a top-class goalkeeper, but as a Freiburg fan, I feel like we will be letting him go for too little. I heard the amount SC Freiburg is asking for is around 8.5 million, around that number. I don't know the exact number, but that number I feel is way too low. I think he's worth more than that. Not 20 million, let's say, but 12 million or 15 million, because his overall strong goalkeeping when it comes to saving those balls would be useful for Schalke. And I do not think that he should be going away for such a low price. But then again, still, Alexander Schwaller should be a player to watch out for, potentially moving to Schalke, and definitely could play a major role for the club. Well, that will be the end of this episode of the Football Baron Podcast. Appreciate everyone for coming in and listening, and thank you all for listening on whatever app you're listening to, on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or any of those podcast apps. I appreciate you listening in, and if you would like to, and we would really appreciate it, subscribe or follow us on that podcast platform, and of course give us 5 stars. It would really be appreciated. And thank you, of course, for watching. You can also go on our YouTube channel, Football Baron, and that will be on, of course, our YouTube channel. It will have various podcast clips in more small, easier to consume video formats. Thank you all for watching, and I appreciate you for listening. Again, thank you. And of course, I hope you all have a great day. Goodbye.